Yo guys, welcome back. My name is Nathan and today we're going to be doing the last positional player rankings of the 2022 NHL offseason with every single NHL team's starting goaltender ranked worst to best. Now we got some big disparity between the best and the worst starting goaltenders in the league. A lot of guys with great experience, with great results, and a lot of teams with starting goaltenders heading into next season that have some huge question marks. But which teams have the worst and the best starting goaltenders, and where does your team's starting goaltender rank among the NHL? Watch till the end for all the picks in the entire ranking, and make sure you hit that subscribe button if you are new. 50% of you guys aren't subscribed, so if you like hockey content, this channel is the place to be. Now let's start today's video off with the worst starting goaltender in the league, and let's go on to number 32, and you could probably guess the Arizona Coyotes are in these last few spots, but I have them in the last place position with their starting goaltender in Karl Vejmelka. Now, Vejmelka is in an interesting situation. He's only played one season, and in that one season this last year, I don't think he was all that effective. Did play the bulk of NHL games, getting 52 games and an .898 save percentage. Now you might say, no, that save percentage is because he's on Arizona, which is partly true, but you also look at his goals saved above expected, which again calculates with every single shot where the shot comes from and if the goaltender should save it. He had a minus 19.9, among the league's worst. Although I do think we'll see Vejmelka maybe next year get a lot more condition to the NHL level. So far, I think he's been the worst starting goaltender. And of course, with all these rankings, since we're only taking into account the last 3 years of sample size, since Vejmelka has only played 1 year, that does go against him in the rankings. But now let's go on to number 31 and the second worst starting goaltender in the league. Let's go on to the Buffalo Sabres number 1 as of right now in Craig Anderson. Now you could make the case that Eric Comrie is maybe the number 1 for the Sabres, and I would say he's still around the same position. But when it comes to Craig Anderson, you see the workload over the past 3 seasons. It hasn't been super sizable. He did play those games for Washington, which was super funny in 2021. In 2022, I thought he was just I mean, he was definitely a great motivator for the Sabres, and even though he only played 31 games, got an .897 save percentage, but you do look at the goals saved above expected over the years, and even when he is playing its best, he's way below average, which is a shame. But considering how old he is at age 41, it's still a miracle he is in the NHL. But next up, let's move on to number 30, and another starting goaltender on a bad team, but considering his situations over the past 3 years, he's actually been in some pretty solid rosters. Next up, I have the Chicago Blackhawks number 1 in Peter Mrazek, who of course was acquired around draft time from the Leafs. And you see over the past 3 seasons, he's had a topsy-turvy ride. I thought in 2020 he was pretty decent and played great in the playoffs, but barely played in 2021, and although he did play well there, he eventually went to Toronto on that pretty big multi-year deal, which I thought at the time was a horrible decision. And it ended up being that way, only playing 20 games and was horrendous. And I don't really see him being much better in Chicago, but you do see the goals he'd above expected over the years. Solid in 2020, but in 2022 was among the league's worst. But now going from one inconsistent goaltender to the next, so let's go on to number 29 and the Vegas Golden Knights newly acquired starter in net, going to Adin Hill, now of Vegas, who's previously with San Jose and with Arizona as well. You look over the past 3 seasons, I think the biggest problem is that he just hasn't played all too much. When he has, I think he's just been okay at best, and you also see the goals saved above expected over the years, just rather ineffective at points, and especially this last year, San Jose had some massive struggles. I do think in Vegas he will be better, but considering he might be the starter for a team that's hoping to make the playoffs, it is still looking like a rough goalie tandem for the Knights. But next up, let's move on to number 28 and a goaltender that over the past couple of seasons has really fallen from grace in my opinion, in the New Jersey Devils number 1 in Mackenzie Blackwood. Now at age 25, there's still time to salvage his career, but this next season is really a make or break year for him. You see over the past 3 seasons, I thought he was really underrated in 2020 and was solid in the games he played in 2019, but since then he's been ineffective, injured, and inconsistent, and the goals saved above expected also paints that same picture, with this last season just being horrible for him. But next up, let's go on to one of the more interesting starting goaltenders in the NHL, and going on to the Colorado Avalanche, newly acquired number 1 in Alexander Georgiev. Now, to me, I think Georgiev could maybe be a lot higher after next year. You see over the past 3 seasons, solid save percentages, and in 2022, it was a weird year for him, getting an .898, and you look at the goals saved above expected, it's just been fine, sometimes below average. But to me, when it comes to Georgiev, the main thing is when he is the starter, when he's playing a bulk amount of games in a short span, he really starts to get momentum. When he's the backup though and only playing 1 out of 4 games, for instance, that's where he really starts to struggle. So in Colorado, with a great defense and being the starter, I could see Georgiev having a lot of success there. But now let's go on to number 26, and another goaltender that has so much talent. For the San Jose Sharks, they're number 1 in Kaapo Kähkönen. Now you could make the case that James Reimer is the guy there, and I think Reimer will be a bit higher, but I do think Kähkönen has the potential to get a lot of games in next year. And you see over the past 3 seasons with Minnesota and San Jose, it's been a little bit inconsistent, but I do think this last year in Minnesota he was decent, and I think in the games he played in San Jose, he was really solid down the stretch. You look at the goals he'd have expected, it's not amazing, but again, you do see that time in 11 games, he was a +4, not too bad, and I do think this next year will be pretty big in the make or break category for him. At age 26, he needs to start showing up. Now, speaking of players that need to start showing up, let's go on to one of the most interesting cases in the league right now, and the Toronto Maple Leafs starter in Matt Murray. Now, I couldn't in good faith put Matt Murray any higher than number 25, because over these past 3 seasons, he's just been an inconsistent mess. You see his last year in Pittsburgh, it was his last year for a reason, and in 2021 was also banged up a ton and was awful with what he played in Ottawa. But there was a lot better of a mark in 2022, a .906 save percentage in 20 games, and that reflects in the goals state above expected, a +3 compared to a -15 and a -13. I think under the right system, Murray can do a lot better, but again, that health and inconsistencies is what really takes him away from being a starting goaltender and a true one, at least right now. But now going on to number 24, and unfortunately for me at least, one of the more overrated players in the NHL, one of the more overrated goaltenders on the list, with the Philadelphia Flyers number 1 in Carter Hart. Now I will say this, another goaltender that has all the talent in the world, but considering the situation he has been, even though I don't think he's doing Philadelphia any favors, they aren't doing Carter Hart any favors either. You see over the past 3 seasons, I thought he was really interesting in 2020, where he played really his first more than 40 game season, and in the playoffs was pretty great too, but in 2021, I thought he was downright atrocious, was worse than horrible. He was unbelievably bad. And in 2022, even though the save percentage got better, I do still think he was weighing Philadelphia down quite a bit. And you look at the goal state above expected, he's just been in the dumps since 2020, but I'm really holding on to hope that he's able to turn a corner and start to produce better results for Philly. But now let's move on to number 23, and another team that kind of has a weird situation in terms of this true starting goaltender, but I'm going to go with the Boston Bruins number 1, and I'm going to move on to another young goalie in Jeremy Swayman. Now, I just consider Swayman the starter over Ullmark, but really it's a tandem for a reason, and I feel like they'll kind of switch games still in 2023. But you see over the past couple of seasons with Swayman in the NHL, you see in the 10 games he played in 2021, he was absolutely unreal. This year in 2022, I thought he was solid, and in the playoffs with a .911 save percentage was really interesting for the Bruins when he did play. You look at the goal save above expected, I think it was a little bit low compared to my eye test at least this last year of a -4, but I think as an average goaltender this year to be at that level at age 23 is pretty impressive, and I do think for the Bruins, if he continues to improve like he has, I think he'll be a solid starting goaltender in a top 21 in no time. But now let's move on to number 22, and this is the one that hurts me the most, because this player, in my opinion, went from one of the most underrated and stellar goaltenders in the league to arguably the most overrated. Next up, I have from the Anaheim Ducks, John Gibson, and it's really sad to see the fall from grace. I would say in his mid-20s, he had an argument to be a top 5, top 3 goaltender out there, but since then, and especially over these past 3 years, it has just been rocky for him. You see that start in 2020, a .904 save percentage, a .903 save percentage in 2021, and then a .904 save percentage again in 2022. I think at times, especially again in 2019, 2018, there was a much better argument that he was amazing under a really bad Ducks defense, and even though that Ducks defense still isn't amazing, I think they've gotten better at suppressing high danger chances, and you see the fall in goals saved of expected. In 2020, it was awful, and even though he's been below average in 2021 and 2022, I'm still hoping for Anaheim's sake that he's able to get back to that mid-20s form. Next up, going on to the final goaltender outside the top 20 though, and let's go on to the Florida Panthers starting goaltender in Sergei Bobrovsky, who is one of the hardest players to rank in this list because he was really phenomenal in a lot of ways this last year, but again, judging on that 3-year sample size with 2020 and 2021 taken into account, it's less than impressive. But this is the thing, you look at 2020 and 2021, really underwhelming years from him in my opinion, but 2022 was amazing, and even though he wasn't maybe as good as you'd like in the playoffs, especially down the stretch, I thought he was still solid. And you look at that record, 39-7-3, and you look at the goals above expected, it paints the same type of picture. Awful in 2020, pretty bad in 2021, but one of the better goaltenders in the league in 2022. But that's the thing, if he produces that same result again for Florida, he will be a lot higher next year. And also going by the goals above expected, of course, and judging everything, I do like to use analytics quite a bit, especially when it comes to goaltenders, and I feel like Bobrovsky is a pretty good case to that. The eye test almost fits up perfectly with what goals above expected is saying, and if you want to know where I'm getting this from, it's from evolvinghockey.com, so there you go. But now let's start off the top 20 with the Los Angeles Kings #1, this time with Jonathan Quick, who over the past 3 seasons has kind of had at some points kind of a tandem going with Cal Peterson, but I think especially after this year, I mean, Quick has solidified himself again as the Kings #1, and kind of the same thing as Sergei Bobrovsky, where I think this last year he had his best season by far, a .910 save percentage, and I think pretty underrated in the playoffs, but considering how really dire the Kings defense situation was during the year, Quick came in clutch quite a bit, but you see in 2021, really lackluster year, didn't really play that many games, and was decent in 2020, and again, that goals above expected completely backs up that eye test. Pretty weird in 2020, pretty weird in 2021, but back to a pretty great level in 2022, and the crazy thing is, he's 36 years old, still playing like that, and I think for the Kings, that is the best news you could ever possibly have. But next up, going to number 19, and one of the more, I guess, underrated prospects, goaltenders on the list. I don't think he's quite a prospect anymore, but still a relatively young goaltender. Going on to the Ottawa Senators #1 goalie in Anton Forsberg. Now, I was tempted to put Cam Talbot in this spot, but I have a feeling that Anton Forsberg is going to continue his underratedly great play. Now, you look over the past 3 seasons, in 2021, 2020 did not play that much NHL time, but in 2022 was the starter for the Sens in a lot of ways, playing 46 games, and got a .917 save percentage, and you look at the goals above expected, a +11 this last year, which I had to go back and look at some film for this video, and I feel like Forsberg was really underrated this last year. If he continues that and continues to get more comfortable at the NHL level, I could see Forsberg being maybe even inside the top 15 next year. Really underrated for Ottawa, and I think he'll continue that play next year. Now, strangely enough, moving on to the second straight goaltender in the Atlantic Division that I think is extremely underrated, let's go on to number 18 and the Montreal Canadiens now #1 goaltender in Jake Allen, who, in my opinion, over these past 3 seasons, considering the situations he's been in, I think has drove some pretty good results. You've seen his last year with St. Louis, which again is around the sample size. He was phenomenal in the 24 games he played and was great in the playoffs, even better than he was in the regular season. In 2021, he got a .907 save percentage with the Habs as a fantastic backup position, and this last year got more responsibility, played 35 games, getting a .905 save percentage. Although I wouldn't be extremely comfortable with him being the true starter long term, I think as a guy that plays around 40 games, he's really dependable, and you see the goals they'd have expected, just around a league average, and 2020 being a massive exception in a very good way. But now we have to move on to number 17, and easily the hardest goalie to rank in this list, by far, the Seattle Kraken's #1 goalie in Philip Grubauer. Now here's the thing, how do you evaluate a goaltender that was pretty solid in 2020, was pretty great in 2021, yet was the worst starting goaltender in the league by far in 2022? I don't know how you do it. I could see somebody having him like 25th. I could see somebody having him 10th, and I could see the reasons why. You see over the past 3 seasons, in 2020 was okay for the Avs and pretty solid in the playoffs. When you look at the 2021 season, was great in the regular season, was 3rd in Vezina Trophy voting, then went to Seattle and was the worst goaltender in the league in my opinion, an .889 save percentage, and you look at the goals above expected, a -31. About as atrocious as you could ever possibly hope hoped to be in Seattle. He could be league average, and the Kraken would have won like 10 more games because of it. It was unbelievable. I do think Grubauer will be better next year, but if he continues even a little bit of this last year, he's going to be a lot lower. But now let's move on to number 16, right in the league average, right in the middle, with the Columbus Blue Jackets number 1, Elvis Merzlikins. Now, with Merzlikins, he's been a pretty interesting player to track over these past 3 years. In 2020, his rookie season, he was pretty interesting, and I thought really great down the stretch, getting a .923 save percentage, and was around that Calder voting right to the very end. In 2021, he only played 28 games, was lesser so, a .916 save percentage, and this last year, got more games played, 59 games, and a .907 save percentage. I do think Merzlikins this last year was a little bit underwhelming, and that's why he's not higher, but I do think he's another goaltender that the talent is amazing, and hopefully if Columbus's defense is better next year, I think Merzlikins will rise to the occasion. But next up, now inside the top 15, let's go on to the Detroit Red Wings newly acquired number 1 in Ville Husso. Now, I could see Husso getting maybe 45 games, maybe Nedeljkovic getting around that 38, 39 game threshold, but I do think when it comes to Husso, he'll just barely be the starting goaltender next year, especially when you compare the contracts. I mean, 4.75 in terms of cap, it is pretty large and pretty sizable. But you see, he's only played 2 seasons of NHL time. In 2021, 17 games and an 8/93 save percentage. I thought he was extremely underwhelming when he did play, which is what made that 2022 rise so much more surprising. In 40 games, a .919 save percentage, and even though he was underwhelming in the playoffs, you see the goals he above expected. He was one of the best goalies in the league in the regular season, out of thin air. It was unreal to see, and I do think even though he won't be as good as this last year, I think he'll be solid for Detroit, and hopefully, again, as that defense gets a little bit better, Husso will be able to survive. Next up, going on to number 14, and the goaltender of the St. Louis Blues decided to keep, instead of Husso, in Jordan Binnington, and to me, Binnington and Husso are pretty much tied. I could see you going for Husso with lesser sample size, but to me, I think with Binnington over the past 3 years, there's a little bit more of an NHL sample there, and especially with how much better he was in the playoffs last year, I think that gives him the slight edge. But you see, over the past 3 seasons, it's been around that .910 save percentage. This last year in the regular season wasn't nearly as good, but I do think, even though the goal seed of expected just hates him for this last 2022 season, I think he's just a pretty league average starting goaltender, especially not taking into account that 2019 run. Also, before anybody asks, goal state of expected does take into account team defense. So for this next goaltender, that will definitely play a part. Let's go on to number 13 and the Minnesota Wild's starting goaltender in Marc-Andre Fleury. Now, again, just like I think kind of the opposite of maybe a Philip Grubauer, or maybe even the same sort of thing. I think when it comes to Marc-Andre Fleury, these past 3 years have been a humongous roller coaster. I thought 2020 for him in Vegas was really bad. A .905 save percentage, only playing 4 playoff games. I thought he was extremely underwhelming, and I think that was the first season, at least with him in Vegas, that really started to spell the end for him. But the thing is, in 2021, he exploded, won the Vezina Trophy, got a .928 save percentage, and even though he had some big gaffes in the playoffs, his season was a big success. But in 2022, of course, you saw the trade to Chicago, and even though I think a .908 save percentage there is still pretty impressive, in terms of the actual goals that were going in, there were a lot of times, especially early on in the season, where there were a ton of goals that shouldn't have gone in. And you see, even though it did get better in Minnesota, I do think Fleury is just along the same lines as Binnington, even though a lot more inconsistent. I think is pretty league average. You see the goals he'd have expected over the years. In 2020, it was horrible. In 2021, it was one of the best. And you see in 2022, it was not good with Chicago. But I do think what we see in Minnesota is what we will see for the rest. Just a -1 league average, and just around what he needs to be for Minnesota to get wins. But now going on to another goaltender that has his fair share of inconsistencies. At number 12, one of the bigger free agent signings of this last offseason in Jack Campbell of the Edmonton Oilers. Now, here's the thing. Over the past 3 seasons, I think he's been a little bit more consistent than Fleury, albeit not as good as the 2021 season. You still see some of the results. In 2020 was okay with the Kings, great with the Leafs. In 2021 was really good in the sample size he played, and fantastic, I thought. Their best player in the playoffs versus the Habs. And you see in 2022, it was a really funky year for him. A 914 save percentage. You look at the goals hit above expected, and I think being a -7 is a good indication of the entire year, but he was also among the best, I think rivaling Igor Shesterkin in the first couple of months of the year. But as kind of the inconsistency started to come, there were some big problems there, and he eventually in the second half was just egregious for Toronto. But I do feel like in Edmonton, I feel like there will be more stabilization there. Now, I know I've said consistency a lot in today's video, but the fact that we're at number 12 and we still have a goaltender that is as inconsistent as Jack Campbell is really does show you the state of goaltending in the NHL right now. But I'd much rather take this than the early 2010s where there was 3 goals a game. So I'm definitely much happier because of it. But now let's move on to number 11 and the Pittsburgh Penguins number 1 in Tristan Jarry, another guy, say it with me, that has had some inconsistencies over the past 3 years, but I think is one of the more interesting goaltenders that we look towards for the future. Over these last 3 seasons in 2020, he got a really interesting sample size in 33 games, getting a .921 save percentage. In 2021, though, it really started to crumble a little bit for him, and the weaknesses that he had in his game really got exposed. A .909 save percentage, which was still okay, but in the playoffs was horrible for Pittsburgh. This last year, though, got back to that 2020 form with much better sample size to him, with 58 games, a .919 save percentage. But the problem was that big injury in the first round cost the Penguins quite a bit and only played 1 game. I do hope, though, for Jarry, we'll see more of that 2022 self, and you look at the goals saved above expected as well. Solid in 2020, horrible in 2021, and great in 2022. It checks out. But now let's get us started with the top 10 goaltenders and top 10 starting goaltenders in the NHL. And next up, let's go to my favorite team's number 1 for hopefully the foreseeable future. We'll see if he gets signed this offseason in Jake Oettinger. Now, you guys know, if you've been on the channel for a long time, I've been tooting Oettinger's horn for a long while, but even I didn't think that at age 23, he would be this high this soon. But you see, over the past 2 seasons, I think I've been banging the drum of Oettinger so hard. But you see, over the past 2 seasons of workload, 29 games in 2021 and a .911 save percentage, I thought he was extremely underrated as a rookie and was really impressive and the Stars' best goaltender that year by far. In 2022, in 48 games, got a .914 save percentage, a step ahead. And when he was at his best, he was saving so many games for the Stars, especially with their lack of offense during the year. It was underratedly impressive. And of course, in the playoffs, in that 7-game series versus Calgary, is where he got a ton of the attention, and rightfully so, a .954 save percentage. Now, in terms of goals they'd have expected, I'm not sure why exactly it underrates it quite a bit. It had him as a league average goaltender this last year. I think he was better than that, but you do look as well in the playoffs where that was much better, a +13 in 7 games versus Calgary. I think that's a much better indicator of what we'll see with Oettinger long term. Now, let's go on to one of the more random and wacky goaltenders of this list at number 9, and the Carolina Hurricanes starting goaltender in Frederik Andersen, who some people might say is too low, some people might say is too high. I really don't know where to rank Frederik Andersen. I can't lie. I don't know what it is with this guy. Every single time I underrate him, he does amazing. Every single time I overrate him, he starts to suck. You'd see over the past 3 seasons, 2020 was just okay, and at some points was meh, and in the playoffs did play pretty well with a .936 save percentage, but in 2021, it all fell apart for him with Toronto. He was awful in the 24 games he played, an .894 save percentage. Had to go play 2 games for the Marlies to give you an example of the struggles. But in 2022, having all the injuries that he did in 2021, all of the horrible struggles that he had, playing horribly in the AHL, he signs a multi-year deal with Carolina. I thought it was going to be not a horrible signing, not the worst thing in the world, but I didn't think it was going to be this amazing deal for them. But he just comes out, looks like he's in his prime again, as healthy as ever, in 52 games, a .922 save percentage, and was one of the best goaltenders in the league. I don't know how to rate this guy. Number 9. That's all I'm going to say. But now moving on to number 8, and a goaltender that I think just narrowly goes ahead of Frederik Andersen, and of course got the Stanley Cup this last year with the now Washington Capitals number 1 in Darcy Kuemper, who at age 32 has accomplished so much over these past couple of seasons, and over the past 3 years. In 2020, you see his last year of Arizona, extremely underrated, a .928 save percentage, and it was such a shame that he couldn't play more games. But in 2021, or I guess it wasn't his last season in Arizona, my bad. In 2021, he got a 907 save percentage. Wasn't as good, but I do feel like there was some team issues because of him. When they were playing, it felt like Arizona wasn't as good as they should have been. And in 2022, you see his first year with Colorado. In the regular season, he started off pretty rough, but in the second half was absolutely unreal. And you see in the playoffs, even though he wasn't amazing, he was just good enough to get the job done. And you see the goals above expected over the years. 2022, a plus 15, and in 2020, a plus 8. One of the better goaltenders in the NHL. Now, to be inside the top 7 with only playing really one season of really sizable games is super impressive, but Ilya Sorokin is just that guy. Like, seriously. I think he honestly might be a little bit underrated by me, but it's only because of the lack of amazing sample size. But you see over the past 2 seasons, you can't really expect better from him. In 22 games, his first 22 NHL games, he got a 918 save percentage, got a 922 save percentage in the playoffs, and this last year was unreal. Might have had a case to be maybe one of the best players in general in the second half. A 925 save percentage in 52 games, and you see the goal saved above expected. A plus 3 in his first year, really respectable, but a plus 21 in 2022. Seriously, I don't think he gets enough credit, and I think personally, he's going to win the Vezina Trophy next year if the Islanders even sniff the playoffs. It's going to be a lock. Next up, going on to the best American goaltender in the league at number 6, and the Vancouver Canucks. Franchise face in Thatcher Demko. Now, not the only franchise face, but the franchise face in goal. And at age 26, right in the prime of his career, he's done so much already. You see over the past 3 seasons in 2020, the regular season wasn't amazing by him, but he was really unreal in the 4 games he played, I believe versus Vegas in the 2020 playoffs. In 2021, got better, played more games, and had a bigger role in net with a 915 save percentage, played pretty solidly. And in 2022, even though he got the same save percentage, there was a much bigger sample size, and I thought he played better too. The Canucks defense had some massive troubles, let's just say, and Thatcher Demko was able to alienate a little bit of that, or hide a little bit of that. You see the goals he'd have expected, great in 2021, lesser so in 2022, but here's the thing, I think Thatcher Demko is one of the goaltenders getting just the worst amount of results on the penalty kill. You see, even strength-wise, he's a plus 17 goals saved of expected even strength. If he's able to improve his play penalty kill-wise, I think he'll be much higher next year, and hopefully we'll see more consistency too. Now let's start off the top 5 with another Canadian team's number 1 goalie, and another goaltender that we've just based off this last season would be much higher, but with the last 3 seasons has had some year-to-year inconsistencies in Jacob Markstrom of the Calgary Flames. Now this last year was unbelievable by him. You see the 922 save percentage, 9 shutouts, really just great when he was really on. The playoffs though was a little bit underwhelming, but you see the past 3 seasons, great in his final year with Vancouver at a 918 save percentage and a 919 save percentage in those 14 playoff games and with that Canucks run. But the main thing for me and the main reason why he isn't higher is just the 2021 season. A 904 save percentage, and in my opinion, he was one of the main reasons why the Flames were so underwhelming last year, really putting up lackluster results by himself. But I don't really have many doubts, so we'll see another great season with him next year with Calgary, with that Flames defense being even more improved than it was last year. But next up, let's move on to number 4, and one of the more consistent goaltenders and consistently high-end goaltenders in the NHL, and another Canadian team's goalie in Connor Hellebuyck, who at age 29, although he might just slightly be exiting the prime of his career, is still among the best out there. You see in the past 3 seasons, a 922 save percentage in 2020, a 916 save percentage in 2021, and a 931 save percentage in the playoffs. And this last year, the save percentage wasn't as good, and although I definitely think this last year was maybe his worst out of the last 3, I still think he was one of the most underrated players in the league this last year. You see the goals saved above expected. It has been getting less and less every single year, but still a plus 11 at least over the past 3 seasons and a plus 18 in 2020. Considering what he has to deal with that Jets defense, it is still miraculous that Hellebuyck is this good. Next up, let's go on to Central Team to Central Team, and one of the most fascinating goaltenders to see their rise over the last couple of years, and really just to watch in general. Going on to number 3, one of the most exciting goaltenders in the league, in UC Saros. Now, I still remember like 3-4 years ago, there were so many people saying, oh, he's 5'10", he's never gonna do anything. And I remember just watching him enter the NHL and rooting for him only because of that, but slowly loving him just with the personality that he provides. It also helps that he's one of the best goaltenders in the NHL. At 5'10", is proving all the doubters wrong. And it's another reason why I do think players like Dustin Wolf, considering how good they are positionally, can find great success at the NHL level. But you see over the past 3 seasons, in 2020, a .914 save percentage in 40 games. In 2021, those where he really started to get amazing results. A .927 save percentage, a .921 save percentage in the playoffs. And this last year, even though the save percentage wasn't as good, you see that workload, 67 games with the Preds. And in my opinion, even though the save percentage wasn't as good, I thought he played his best hockey. And you see the goals he'd have expected. I think it was really rough in those last couple of weeks. You see the +4 compared to the +16 in 2021. But to me, Saros is one of the best and one of the best upcoming goaltenders in the NHL, while he's also providing great results over these last 3 years. Now, I want to set the record straight here that for these top 2 goaltenders, they are the best in the league by far. And to me, they are practically tied. So when I say that Igor Shesterkin is the second best goaltender in the league right now, I don't want to make it seem like I hate him. If you guys have noticed anything with the channel, you guys would know how much I have been tooting Igor Shesterkin's horn. But at the same time, there is still a little bit that holds him back, mainly again with that 3-year sample size. He barely played in 2020 and still didn't get that much of a workload in 2021, playing 35 games, getting a .916 save percentage and being great. The thing is, 2022 was the best goaltender in the world by far. Was unbelievable. A .935 save percentage, a .929 save percentage in the playoffs was unreal. And to me, I could see Shesterkin being number 1 next year. Again, the problem is the lack of amazing sample size, but I have no doubts that he'll be the number 1 and likely the number 1 goaltender in the league after next year. But now going on to the number 1 and in my opinion the best goaltender in the NHL for now, and especially over these past 3 seasons, let's move on to the Tampa Bay Lightning's number 1 goaltender in Andre Vasilevskiy. Now again, going off of these past 3 seasons, there's no goaltender that's been better accomplished and has done bigger things than Vasilevskiy. In 2020, a .917 save percentage, but a .927 save percentage in 25 playoff games, winning his first Stanley Cup. Then you see the exact next year, much better in almost every single department, a .925 save percentage in the regular season, then a .937 save percentage in the 2021 playoffs, leading his team to back-to-back Stanley Cups. And you see this last year, wasn't as good, but a pretty great sample size, 63 games, a .916 save percentage, a .922 save percentage again in the playoffs. And that's crazy to think about, that it was that good after a really rocky start in that series versus Toronto. Just shows how good he was throughout the rest of the playoffs. And you see the goals saved above expect in the regular season. In 2020, it wasn't as good, but you see in 2022, it was a +13. In 2021, it was a +11. And you also got to think about the playoff stats as well. Well above average all 3 seasons, and being one of the biggest reasons why this Tampa team has been so scary. But that is going to be it for today, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you did enjoy, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell. Comment down below what you guys agree and disagree with my list. And let me know, where would you rank your team's number 1 starting goaltender? Let me know all your thoughts down below. Comment all your thoughts, like the video, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, share this video with your friends, get it to all the hockey fans you guys know online, and click this card for all my hockey rankings content right in one playlist. I have been recording for 56 minutes now, so I am going to take a break. Have a good one, y'all, and goodbye.